Good morning. I'd like to thank the Chair and the Secretary for the invitation to speak to the Convention. I'm speaking on behalf of Votes for Irish Citizens Abroad, which is a campaign based in London, VICA for short. VICA is a group of people from London's various Irish communities made up of a mix of older emigrants, second-generation people like myself, and very, very recent immigrants who've come over in the last 3 or 4 years. We have made 2 submissions to the Convention, one addressing electoral reform of the Dáil, and the other for the session on allowing Irish citizens abroad to vote for the President. And I'm addressing the first one, the one on the electoral reform of the Dáil, the system for the Dáil today. VICA hopes you will agree that one of the substantive issues the Convention should address concerning electoral reform is including Irish citizens abroad as voters in general elections and referenda. In other words, ending the disenfranchisement of Irish citizens abroad. Our definition of abroad is outside the island of Ireland. This means we considered the voting rights of Irish citizens in Northern Ireland, though obviously a very legitimate issue, to be beyond VICA's remit. And to that end, discussing the votes for Irish citizens abroad, we're in close contact with campaigners also in the United States and Australia. So I want to divide what I'm saying today into 3 parts. One, a little bit more detail on actually what we're campaigning for. Secondly, an argument for why there's an advantage to considering it. And thirdly, I just want to address some of the fears and doubts that exist about the issue of votes for citizens abroad. So what are we campaigning for? Different groups of Irish citizens abroad have different nuances for what they would really like. But what VICA is campaigning for is the right to vote in elections for the Dáil to be granted to all Irish emigrant citizens abroad. That is, citizens who emigrated from Ireland. This to be managed through a system of reserved constituencies in order to not swamp the votes of resident citizens, and I'll come back to that. The vote to be granted with no time limits to reflect a long-term commitment to Ireland and intentions on the part of emigrants to return. So to give some context to this, the European Union advises its member states that it is in their interests to ensure that their diasporas continue to actively exercise the rights linked to their nationality, and also to ensure that their citizens abroad, their diasporas, contribute in a variety of ways to the political, economic, social, and cultural development of their countries of origin. The United Nations position is that every citizen should have an equal right and opportunity to vote and be elected, and this can only be subject to reasonable restrictions. And the reasonable restriction they give as an example is setting a minimum voting age. With a high degree of consensus around the world on the importance of the rights of citizenship, it's no surprise to learn that 115 countries across the globe give their citizens abroad the right to vote. Depending on their constitutions, how their citizens abroad participate varies. So, to give you a couple of examples, in, for example, the United States of America and Mexico, they allow their citizens abroad to vote for the president. In each of these countries, the presidency carries significant executive power, unlike in Ireland. In countries like France, citizens abroad can vote for members of parliament and the presidency. In these, then, and another 112 countries, moving abroad does not invoke automatic disenfranchisement for their citizens. Yesterday, we heard some of the political scientists explain that in Ireland, in electing a TD, you elect a government. That is, in electing a TD, you elect both the legislature and the executive arm of government. This means that if you are to consider ending the disenfranchisement of Irish citizens abroad. This entails giving them the right to vote in general elections for the Dáil. Now, what could be the advantages of this? First of all, it would enable Ireland to fully live up to the claim in its constitution that, and I quote, "It is the entitlement and birthright of every person born in the island of Ireland, which includes its islands and seas, to be part of the Irish nation. That is also the entitlement of all persons otherwise qualified in accordance with law to be citizens of Ireland." End of quote. Eamon Gilmore, speaking on behalf of the government at the Global Diaspora Forum in Dublin earlier this week, said that this constitutional commitment to the diaspora underpins support and engagement of the Irish abroad. There is support in the form of funds to assist Irish organisations concerned with the welfare needs of the Irish abroad. However, many people in the diaspora feel their birthright to be fully part of the Irish nation has been removed from them. This is particularly strongly felt at a time of renewed large-scale emigration, about which there is considerable anger directed at the way the Celtic Tiger ended in spectacular fashion. In the past 4 years, 300,000 people have left Ireland. Not all are emigrant citizens. Some are people who immigrated here in the last 15 years. But with each year, as the statistics show, a larger and larger proportion of those leaving are emigrant citizens. Some have left voluntarily, as politicians are quick to tell us all the time. But many, and I can vouch for this meeting people in London and in the States recently, would rather have stayed here. Even those who leave voluntarily can be subject to what I describe as involuntary non-return. An inability when they want to come back to Ireland to be able to achieve that because of the lack of jobs and opportunities in Ireland. And bear in mind, the current phase of emigration is on top of two others in the past 60 years, when hundreds of thousands of people also left. That is why a mixture of generations forms the basis of Vicar's campaign. People are motivated by it happening all over again. Emigrants continue to think of themselves as stakeholders in Irish society. A wide range of social media not only facilitates constant contact with friends and family in Ireland, but also keeping up to date on Irish news, issues and current affairs. Plus, cheaper transport means that emigrants can visit home more often than in the past. There has always been and continues to be a constant flow of social, cultural and economic remittances from the diaspora to Ireland. Since the financial crash in 2008, the Irish government on a number of occasions has called upon the diaspora to help Ireland, setting up events like the Global Irish Forum, to which there has been a good response. Simultaneously, though, there has been a heightening of awareness of the democratic deficit in the relationship. We all saw, else in Britain, pictures of Polish people in Ireland queuing to cast their vote in their last national elections. Emigrants in London, for example, become aware that British immigrants in Ireland can vote both for the Dáil and for Westminster for 15 years after they leave Britain. Irish citizens, it's true, can vote in the Westminster elections, a legacy of a deal done between the two governments in the 1950s. But this does not apply to Irish emigrants in the USA or Australia or Canada, the main other destinations at the moment. Extending the franchise to enable Irish citizens abroad to vote in general elections and referenda will not only make good this democratic deficit, but also cement the relationship between Ireland and its diaspora for the future in an increasingly globalised, competitive and fluid world. And finally, I just want to address some of the fears and doubts. Some argue that if the vote was granted to citizens abroad, due to this history of Irish emigration, the votes of resident citizens would be swamped. This is a real fear, and we suggest external constituencies for the diaspora, just like the French and Italians provide for their citizens abroad. This ring-fences the vote, the diaspora vote, but also gives the diaspora direct representation to the Dáil. Some argue that you cannot have representation without taxation. The key point, however, is that it is taxation that depends on residency, not voting. Think of the immigrants in Ireland who pay taxes but do not vote in general elections, whereas voting depends on citizenship. Some argue that citizens abroad are not subject to the laws of the state. They are subject to the laws of the Irish state. For example, they cannot vote in elections. Some fear that the diaspora votes would be likely to skew the results of an election, that they are all likely to vote in a particular way. People who think that, I don't think, know an awful lot about the diaspora, because it's as heterogeneous, as mixed as the Irish nation as a whole, with as many different points of view. The experiments in online polls of the diaspora that have taken place to date show spreads of votes very similar to those in Ireland itself. Some people argue there is no widespread support for this extension of the franchise in Ireland. However, research currently being undertaken at University College Cork involves a large-scale survey not only of contemporary migrants themselves, but also people in the households they are now leaving, in other words, their families. The first results, which the team at UCC, headed by Dr. Piers McHenry, will be releasing soon, and which they let me look at, show substantial majorities of the people in these households think the current emigration is having a negative effect on Irish society and that emigrants should not be disenfranchised. The strongest view seems to be that at least for a certain period of years, the right to vote should not be removed. And I'm grateful to my colleagues in Cork for letting me quote their research. So to end, I want to urge you to make recommendations on this matter. And if it is the case that you can't consider it this weekend and it is dealt with in September, that you don't limit your considerations in September just to giving citizens abroad the vote for the presidency. I've been making the case for why there really will be no satisfaction on this point until the right for citizens to vote for the Dáil, as their equivalents in many, many, many other countries can do, is satisfied. And finally, can I just say that I hope if you haven't already read it, probably most of you have, that there's far more detail on this in our submission, and also that of the Federation of Irish Societies, which is a group in Britain that represents over 100 Irish organisations in Britain. Thank you very much for hearing me.